Good morning. I'm That Nerdy Catholic, and I want to welcome you to... Good morning. I'm That Nerdy Catholic, and I want to welcome today JonMarc Grodi again, the Chief Operating Officer of the Coming Home Network. And this week, I wanted to talk about a video that we're putting out this morning, the Insights video with the Coming Home Network. It's Peter Kraft, and he's talking, I know it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, talking about C.S. Lewis as the gateway drug to the Catholic Church. There's so many people that have come into the Catholic Church saying that C.S. Lewis was one of their main influences in thinking about the Catholic Church, which is kind of odd since he never himself became Catholic. But JonMarc and I have had a number of conversations before about literature and the role that literature plays in people thinking about the Catholic Church, especially the writings of C.S. Lewis, of Chesterton, of Tolkien, and a number of other just really great writers from this last century, and the things that they've written about that have opened so many people's eyes to the Catholic Church. So JonMarc, would you say, is the one author that has really opened your eyes most to some of the things in the Catholic Church?
You're going to make me pick one of those three.
Well, no, any. It could be any.
Wait, there are others than those three?
There might be.
Tolkien,
I've never heard of them.
Chesterton and Lewis are my guys. I really, and particularly in relation to this topic. Mm-hmm. And because if I were to summarize, like on this topic of people that kind of open up to the Catholic Church, I mean, there's different ways to do that. There's the more straightforward sort of apologetic, like teaching the faith way, like opening up a catechism. But what's kind of the broader, more atmospheric way, the more ambient way that people are opened up to Catholicism? And I don't think anyone does that quite like Chesterton, Tolkien, and Lewis. Mm-hmm. You might say that in their writings, both their nonfiction as well as their fiction, it's like the whole sky behind everything is sort of the Catholic worldview. Yeah. Which is very different. The air that you breathe in their books is very different than the air you breathe in other books. And it's a Catholic worldview. It's a Catholic way of approaching the world. Mm-hmm. Actually, Peter Kraft, one of the best ways I've kind of heard it described is when Kraft in some of his works is talking about sort of like the scientific materialist, presumptive worldview. Mm-hmm. When it looks at the world, it has a reductive presupposition. So for the scientific materialist, everything is less than it seems. Yeah. Love is only really just lust, and reason is really just rationalization, and this table is really just the things that it's made up of. Yeah. But everything is less than. Well, Kraft makes a good point that for the Christian, everything is more. He quotes what he calls the Horatio principle. The Hamlet principle, because in Hamlet says, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than you've dreamt of in all your philosophies. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a neat way to sum up the way that Catholics approach the world, from a position of being able to harmonize any truth and beauty and goodness that's out there into this coherent whole. The Catholic worldview always expects to find more, greater elaboration, greater detail, greater depth as it explores the world. Right.
I remember when I first read The Great Divorce, seeing this understanding of salvation, which was so much bigger than I had ever experienced before. This complexity in how God deals with us. That is, I think up to that point, I had a kind of an on-off switch idea of salvation. Well, you're saved or you're not saved, and that's you hear a lot of people using language like that. But the Great Divorce, having this image that was my first experience or my first time thinking about how God deals with us where we are. Mm-hmm. God, we have knowledge, we have understanding, we have experiences, and wherever we are, that's what God is going to use as far as how he deals with us. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's always going to draw us deeper, but that's where he's going to deal with us. And seeing how each different character was dealt with differently because they've come from a different place.
Yeah. It reminds me of another aspect of the Catholic worldview that all three of those authors do well, and that you're getting at and what you're talking about. It's often called the Catholic both and. Throughout history, every heresy since the earliest times of Christianity has always been taking a piece of the truth, a piece of the whole, and exploding that piece to try to be the size of the whole.
Right.
Every heresy, there's a kernel of truth. It's not that it's all wrong. It's a piece of the truth, but then it's obscuring everything else. Well, Catholicism always looks at the both and of all these things. And those writers do a great job at exemplifying that. I mean, Chesterton's the best at this in his writing, like in Orthodoxy. He really works through how in Catholicism you have an embrace of not a kind of a weak melting together of some of these paradoxes. So on the level of virtues he talks about in Orthodoxy. In Catholicism, you have a recognition of on the one side meekness, on the other side of courage. That in the sort of the classical chivalry, that both of those are somehow important. It's not the merely courageous warrior or merely the pacifist Saint Francis. Somehow those virtues in Christianity, in Orthodox Christianity, are melded together and held tightly together. Tolkien does this too. And you think in Lord of the Rings, you have a great playing out of, for Catholics, a great both and topic is this question of God's foreknowledge and man's free will. And historically in Christianity, how to perfectly meld those together, well, we're not really sure how philosophically, but we know in Scripture that God is omniscient. He knows what's going to happen. He can see the whole picture, but somehow I'd still have to choose. I have to make choices. And one of the best ways to really, you can't fully understand that, but you can experience it. And one of the ways that you really can see it played out is in literature, like in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf says, that you get this sense that there's a greater mind beyond this who's sort of working things out. But it still comes down to, but you got to put your foot on the road and make a choice and cooperate with that.
Right. Yeah. In the Space Trilogy, Lewis does a great job at looking at the world as it is. I mean, even looking at life on other planets, it's still looking at the world and the universe as it is, and every once in a while giving a glimpse at what could be beyond it. This reality, this struggle, this war that is going on behind the story that you're reading. And in all of Narnia, all the Narnia books, is the same thing. That there is a struggle, a war that is happening in the background, behind the veil of everything that they've experienced in Narnia, and even looking at whenever Aslan talks about Earth, that there's a connection between Narnia and Earth, and that connection is that there's this reality behind all of it, where things are happening beyond anyone's comprehension. But that those struggles, all the things that are happening in this reality behind the worlds, is playing through into the world.
Lewis does a great job of showing that again in the atmosphere of his books, that tethered by orthodox, when I say orthodox Christianity, I mean like Catholic Christianity, Catholic in the big lower C sort of sense, that in that stream, tethered to the sacred scriptures, but also the authoritative tradition of the church. Within those bounds, we have the freedom to imagine and explore and to integrate in the world. I mean, again, there's no one like, you look through C.S. Lewis's lectures and his essays, and again, with Chesterton's the same way. You have guys who there's nothing that they can't engage. There's no topic that they can't harmonize and integrate. There's no person out there in the world that they can't have a really rollicking good discussion with, because they're tethered, they're moored in a worldview that keeps them grounded, but also allows them to open up and explore and again reach out to any truth, goodness, or beauty and reintegrate it and harmonize it.
Right. Yeah, that idea that anything out there has some aspect of truth and beauty in it, and that there's so many things that can be incorporated into our imagination that we can pull the truth out of, and I think Tolkien is the best in this, as far as just having such an immense world that where Lewis is very literal in his images. Tolkien is very good at, just creating this huge world with so many characters that you can't look at and say, well, okay, this is Jesus, or this is supposed to be this character from the Bible, but you can still see in their worldview that, like you said, there is a Catholic understanding of the world behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're both good at having very rich imagery that's not preachy, that's not... I mean, even, I know Tolkien sometimes complained about Lewis, because they were buddies, and so they were able to complain about each other, to each other, and not to each other sometimes. But, even Lewis, even in, people think of Narnia, and they think of, well, obviously Aslan's Jesus. But, I mean, you dig into the Narnia books, I mean, he's, in many ways, just as rich of a poet and of a writer, writing with rich, complex Catholic imagery, just as anyone else is. There's a great book by, I don't remember his name now, but Planet Narnia delves into some of the medieval imagery of the seven levels of the heavens and the different characters of the planets, which he gets into a lot into the space trilogy. That's actually woven throughout Narnia. But one of the things I know we're both interested in, because we're both young fathers, we've got little kids now that we're tasked with educating. Literature is such a powerful tool for this, and especially the literature of these three guys, particularly Lewis, because in literature you have the opportunity to experience the images and the themes and the characters that can populate your mental imagination as you proceed forth. I mean, the greatest example of this that I think of is, I often want to get into preaching mode with my kids. I want to teach them right from wrong, what to do, what not to do, manners, mores, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But all that's based on, underneath the surface of that, long before you get to the reasoning morally, you have to have the experience of good and evil. You experience the goodness of good. You feel the goodness of good. And you feel the despicableness of evil. Like you read a Dickens novel, and you feel the gritty,
griminess
of a Scrooge. And then when someone says, greed is an evil thing, I feel that. I feel you, man.
Right.
So I think it's so important to be immersed in rich literature, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Space Trilogy. I love the Space Trilogy. Some amazing characters, both good and evil, and interesting psychological mixes in there that are so good for our kids to safely be able to explore the wider world. Yeah. But then be able to bring that back to then reflecting on, who am I, who is God, what am I called to, and what do I do with my life?
I think I'm almost done with The Voyage of the Dawn Treader with my two girls. They're 3 and 5, and they're both loving these books. And so we're going to be reading through all 7 of the books. My older one is already asking, well, what's coming next. She asked me the other day. She said, well, there's some other person we were talking about. She's like, well, is that the person that wrote the Narnia books? And I'm like, no. C.S. Lewis wrote all the Narnia books, and you have to remember that name because you'll be reading a lot of his books throughout your childhood. But the line in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I know this is one of the more popular lines in the book, but the line in the book that, for me, I really want to have one of the biggest impacts on their lives is, when Lucy is asking about Aslan. And she hadn't met him yet, and she's kind of scared. It's a big lion. She said, well, is he safe? And he said, well, of course he's not safe. Yeah. He's wild. Yeah. He's not safe, but he's good. He's good. That idea of goodness, and we so often want a God that is safe, that doesn't challenge us, that doesn't push us, that doesn't that we can just feel safe around, like a cat. We want a small, cuddly cat as our God. But God is a lion, but he's a good lion. And we can always trust that he's going to be good, even though he's not always going to be safe.
Yeah, Kreft made that comment about Lewis once. I'm not sure if it originated with Kreft, but or Kraft. How do we say his name?
I think it's Kraft.
Kraft.
I think it's
my
Kraft.
goodness gracious.
It's been said many ways.
That there's not really anyone in history outside of the gospel writers who has maybe given us a little bit of the experience that the disciples must have had encountering Christ. And even we have trouble with that with scriptures. I've always had a little trouble getting into. I mean, they're just such a different time and place. I've had to work really hard on that. But I think Lewis has done an amazing thing in giving us a bit of the experience of Aslan. In our experience of Aslan, we get a little bit of the experience that it must have been like for the disciples to encounter Christ, both the immanence and the transcendence. Chesterton says romance is a bit of the familiar mixed with something bewildering.
Right.
You have a bit of that romance when you encounter Aslan. Yeah, he's not a tame lion, but he's good. He's fiercely, almost terrifyingly good.
Right.
And that must have been a little bit of what it was like to walk with and encounter Christ.
And the other image that I always tie to the image of Aslan and the image that I have of God through the image of Aslan is the phrase that God is the hound of heaven. He is always pursuing us. And sometimes that can be a frightening thing, but we can always trust that it's a good thing because God is always pursuing us because he loves us and because he wants what is best for us. Well, I want to thank you for joining me this morning. And what are some of the books that have opened your imagination to God, to a bigger world that is around us, and even to some of the ideas of the Catholic Church that you've never thought of before? Leave those in the comments below. Join us again. Well, whoever's going to be here, if there's someone here, I don't know if there'll be someone here next Friday, but join me on Monday morning for my vlog, and next Wednesday at noon for another live stream, and then next Friday for another, I don't know, something talking about, some of the great work that we're doing and the Coming Home Network, talking about just all the wonderful people that we've been able to meet and work with. So, all right, thank you.
Have a good day.
See you next week. Bye.